Hey everyone, and welcome to another Abley Fireside chat. Today we've got myself, Hamish, Todd, and Chris, who has recently joined us about 6 months ago. And today we're going to be talking about order of operations in FME and how you can optimise how data flows through your workbench to get the best and fastest result. So you've probably noticed that our setups changed a little bit. We're going to be giving some live demos a go, so bear with us because things might go wrong, but that's part of the fun. So we do have a demo to start off with around order of operations, and I guess probably before we actually even dive into the demo, we explain what order of operations are and how they can affect
what
FME
they mean to us
and what they mean to us in an FME sense.
Yep. So, order of operations for us means a whole bunch of different things, but a lot of it is around getting optimization out of FME and making it run as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible, and
minimising operations.
And minimising our operations, yes. Yep.
So things like if you can, something I've been dealing with recently is I need to read in data multiple times, and initially building the process, I'd put multiple readers in to read in a different subset of the same source data. But now that I'm actually revisiting it and being able to understand the entire process, I've simplified that, so I read in the entire data set once, and then I use testers and test filters to filter out the appropriate data. So instead of having half a dozen readers, I have a single reader, and FME filters it out. But of course, that has its own limitations, which is a bit more advanced, where you are going to have a whole bunch of features sitting within the workbench that may not necessarily be used and may hang around for a long period of time, consuming resources. So I guess something to also bear in mind is that not every solution is appropriate, and sometimes you might need to use a blocking transformer or use multiple readers to read in the same data set. It's really case specific.
Yeah, and balance. So you're balancing off one thing over the other.
Yeah.
And and that's one of the great things about FME, isn't it? You can change the way processes work because there's not a defined way you should do something. I mean, there's usually a bunch of ways that are the best way to do it, but you can make changes and advancements to your process. It's not constrained to one single way of doing something.
But there are kind of approaches which you can take where if you recognise that you are reading in a bunch of different data sources, then there is generally a configuration of that which will work optimally, and it's often not the order in which you first added them into the workspace.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And just thinking on that slight tangent, but something that's really important with order of operations and this sort of stuff that we're talking about with FME is the understanding of what a blocking transformer is. And our demo does sort of show what a blocking transformer is, but before we dive into it, I guess we should probably explain what a blocking and a non-blocking transformer is.
See, there's even the terminology, blocking and non-blocking versus feature and group-based.
And bulk mode
and
not bulk mode. But we're not talking about those today.
But just in terms of the idea that some transformers allow feature-by-feature throughput. So
basically when a feature enters the input port, it does that process and it exits the input port. So something like a attribute creator or a logger, in really simplistic terms, the features just flow straight on through it.
Yes, and compared to, the perfect example of one that's a blocking transformer is the sorter, because you can't sort unless you've got all the features there. So being able to do that, it requires that all the features get to that point at that location before it starts to sort. And I think, one of the things that and I'm sure you guys found it as well, when I first started learning FME a long time ago, one of the things that I came from was an Esri background, and what was relatively new at that time was some of the Python abilities in Esri. And most of those were layer by layer based. And so you performed a application on a layer in its entirety before it went through to the next step. And I think jumping to FME where it was feature by feature for most situations was kind of a bit of a mind blower, and it took a wee while to get my head round. But once you kind of understand that FME offers both that feature operation as well as that kind
as
a group operation,
can get pretty powerful.
Yeah.
So now with an understanding of, a brief understanding of sort of blocking transformers, we'll dive into a wee demo that we have produced. So this is an example that can speed up a lot of workbenches that a lot of people don't actually know about, and that is suppliers first in the feature merger. So in feature merger, you have this little drop down here with suppliers first, and by default that is set to no. And before I explain what it does, I'll show you the behavior when it is set in its default state. So what we've got here is just a creator that's creating 1,000 features, and we've got one of those ports going to the supplier, and then we've got another branch going up to a feature holder, then a decelerator just to slow the data flow down, and then into the requester. And on the feature merger, we're just merging on the creation instance. So when we run this, we'll see that the creator will create the 1,000 features, and they'll straight away hit the supplier port. And you can see that because of the decelerator that's slowing this feature movement down, they're hitting the requester and they're being blocked. Nothing's flowing through into our logger. And this is because we've told the transformer, hey, the supplier isn't expecting features first, but then as soon as the requester receives all its features, they just dump right out to the logger. So what happens if you put the suppliers first to yes is that because we have all our features coming to our supplier initially, when they start coming through the requester, that merge will start to happen and the features will begin to split out the merge port. So I've changed that to yes. Then if we run this again, we'll see that as soon as features start hitting the requester, they pass all the way through the merge port and out to the logger. Now in an example like this, you're talking about a benefit of seconds in terms of optimization, but in large workbenches, this could be minutes or potentially even hours of time saved. And it could also be the difference between a workbench running and a workbench not running because it runs out of resources or times out.
Yeah, it's things like RAM and stuff getting consumed because you're saving so many features onto your device while it's running. The key point about that though as well, all the suppliers need to be first.
Yep.
So you can't just have the first one arrive there. All of them have got to get there. And I think the other specific point about that is that that's kind of suppliers first or sometimes candidates first, etc. Depending on what it's called in the transformer, exists in lots and lots of transformers. It's also only one of the ways that you can control order within in a workbench, but it's definitely probably one of the most, like you say, it's lots of people don't know about it, but it's also one of the most known ones for how to control order operations.
Yeah, because there are a lot of transformers which block in their default behavior but have an option to control the input flow in order so that they don't block. And so in feature merger, that's suppliers first, and point and area overlay, and that's areas first.
There you go, that's what I was looking for. Point on area
overlayer for simple spatial operations. If you can get the areas there first, therefore it won't block.
So that drop down there will cause the transformer to behave in a very similar way to the feature merger, where you get all the areas there first and then they'll just start passing through.
And I mean, there are lots and lots of other things. So, jumping to creators, we've got ability to order creator orders. So by right-clicking on a creator, and you can choose to
set whether creator runs first or not.
Creator runs first. So if you put in, creator runs first, but also if you put in a second creator, and now right click, you will get the ability to run which creator runs first. And the same scenario applies to any single port going out of a transformer. So like that creator, if you click on,
which is exactly what I did here
Yep.
in this. So I set that features would go to the feature holder first, just to force them to get stopped.
Yep. It's quite also a hidden feature, so lots of people don't know about that one. Implemented a few years ago. If I go back into writing FME scripts, when you're actually writing out the text, you used to be able to have a whole bunch of control, because you could set FME runs the text file that it creates in the background in order. So not kind of like a normal programming language which jumps around, but from top down. And so you used to be able to control the order that you used to run basically factories and functions. So for instance, the tester, depending on when you want that to occur, you could change its place within the up and down situation to have it run before some other tester that was doing such and such. And so there's even more control in that scenario. That hasn't been implemented into the workspace, but it's not necessarily something you would utilise all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's so many others as well. So I think one of the things we talk about in terms of reading and writing is we've got reader and writer orders. So being able to start in your navigator, being able to change the level at what your reader is, to change when it's going to be read in. So, for instance, if you have an Excel spreadsheet that you put up the top in your navigator and you're reading the database afterwards, it's reading in that order. And then there's even things like, I think, when you talk about some of those database queries, if you're writing your own database query through an SQL creator and stuff, then you can order features in there by putting a order by or something into that, and that can be very useful for not having to. So sorting in a database is much easier than sorting with an FME.
Yeah. And on those reader and writers, making use of feature readers and feature writers, so that you can chain so that you can read in data after you've written data out. So a great example of that is if you're dealing with the Esri system or a database generated ID, you might need that ID in FME, but you can't get it without writing to the database. So you'd send your data through a database, into a feature writer. Then you can once those writes have taken place, you can use that writer to trigger a feature reader and read that information back in with the database level generated ID or value. Of course, you need to have some sort of logic in there to make sure you're reading in the correct values again, but that can be easily achieved by adding an extra field with their own, an FME generated ID, and then reading back in those specific values.
Yeah, there's lots of potential, and I think sometimes you get too caught up, and I'm speaking for myself here, but I know there's sometimes when I've gone, I really need to be able to make this feature based, and I've got this blocking transformer, and I need to be able to get around that, and you spend ages trying to figure out how you're going to get around that, and then you might come up with the answer that you just can't do it.
Yeah. In terms of that optimization side of order of operations, if you've got a process that runs once a day or even once a week, and you can save 10 seconds on it, it's not really worth the time, the effort going into it. But if that process runs every 5 minutes and you can save 10 seconds, then that's a massive win. Yes. So it's all about that investment of your time in developing the workbench, saying, hey, is it really worth rejigging this entire process just to save 10 seconds on a job that runs once a week?
Yeah, there was a process I developed a few years back which needed to run. It was only weekly, but because it was on our FME server, had to run within a certain memory limit, and then also within the time frame of between the end of the day when people finish working and then ready for integration processes at 8 o'clock. And so it had like a set time limit, and so therefore we put a lot of effort into optimizing that to be able to output all this data, process it all in time within those constraints. And so you need to, so in some cases optimization is really important.
Yep.
So that's a really brief overlook in order of operations in FME. As you can probably guess, we only really scratched the surface on some of the more advanced things, but I feel like it'll be worth us doing a more advanced Fireside on this in the future. So thank you for watching, and this was another Abley FME Fireside with myself, Hamish, Todd and Chris. We'll catch you next time.
Sweet.